Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. Recently, I have been meeting some individuals that have been absolutely blowing my mind and allowing me to tap into the psychedelic nature of life in my sober state of reality, both with their information and knowledge, as well as having first-hand experiences of their magic. Today's returning guest of the show is someone who has very quickly become a dear friend of mine, and someone who has given me an unbelievable amount of power back in the incredible work she does with channeling. For some of you, you may have not heard our first episode we did together, and as such, you may not have heard of channeling before. And for others, you may have heard our first episode, and this may be a newer subject for you. And as such, in this episode, we first dive into the practicality of how to understand what channeling is and how one can begin tapping into this ability themselves before we go into some of the downloads she has received from me in real time. This episode was truly a blast to record, and we got to do so in person in her beautiful space where she treats clients, and her and I went into a pure flow state and dialogued everything that was coming through our hearts. So please, help me in welcoming the one, the only, Mary Buckingham back to the show. Welcome back, Mary. I'm so excited to have you here. We're doing this in person. It's so much fun. We're in your beautiful space. We shared an amazing couple days together. I'm so pumped to have you here.
It's so trippy seeing you in the flesh.
I know.
It's exciting.
I know. I was saying when I got here, I was like, it's so funny when I've talked to people that have a specific background, right? Like every podcaster, coach, everything has a background, right? And so when I saw your background, we shared a synchronicity about Yogananda, where I had just gone to the church where he first came in like the 20s or 30s or something and essentially introduced yoga to the West. And now I'm sitting here. So crazy. Trippy.
Here we are.
I know. Well, I'm super excited to get you back on. Your podcast has done amazing. People have definitely reached out to me and been like, whoa, that was so cool. Can you get Mary back on?
For real?
Yeah, 100%. To talk about channeling and all these things. And so that's why I'm so excited to get you back on. And, I think a great place to start, because we've already gone into your background and stuff. And for anyone who hasn't checked out the first episode, make sure you check that out. It's amazing. But I thought something would be great to start out with is, with this movement of channeling, right, it becoming more mainstream and popularized, and all of us having abilities of some sort, right? Like, what would be ways in which maybe you could tell people they might be experiencing something to do with some type of these senses? Now, whether or not it's just psychic senses like clairvoyance, clairaudience, etc., how would you go about, like, if someone came to you and was like, Mary, I'm experiencing some things, like, what does that look like for you?
So basically, I think going back to, I'll answer it like this. Like when I was young, I have early memories of third eye visions, and then also clairsentience, where I was like my body was getting physically impacted by my environment, particularly through people and all of their unconscious energy. I was perceiving it, but it was getting sucked into my body because I was young and I didn't know what was going on. I didn't have the boundaries yet. So we are all beings that get inundated by our senses at all times. And most of us are used to perceiving through our five senses. And thereby, because those are so, let's just say, like over-exercised, these other sensations that are always kind of going on almost in the background it's just like the different volume knobs. And I know we talked about this on the first podcast. And by the way, I close my eyes when I talk about things like this and channel, because it's something that I discovered would help me formulate more clear sentences, because when my eyes are open, I'm picking up on so much more than just you physically sitting in front of me. So it helps me stay focused and give like a good, more linear answer. But yeah, so it's like, if you can imagine yourself being in this cave and I'm talking to you, and I'm somebody who, let's say, can see what's in the cave, even though there's no light in it. Basically, what sessions help people do is like, we kind of go like this to the walls where we're patting the walls, and I'm saying, okay, look over here. And the person goes like this, and they go, oh, okay, that's where that one is. Mm-hmm. And then, oh, that's where my clear seeing is. That's how I see. That's how I feel. It's a matter of like, and I think we'll get into probably giving an example through maybe reading you, because it's so specific per person. But once the person locates where their receptor is, so let's say their primary receptor is their third eye or their clairsentience, their heart center, or even in the gut, we start to go down almost like a questioning list of, okay, so when this happens, where do you feel it? And then they start to say, well, I think, and I say, no, let's divert back to where you're feeling, because you also have to learn how to dance with your intellect and ego that want to judge, label, compartmentalize these aspects of these other senses that are completely nonlinear. They're completely new ways of receiving, perceiving, and understanding. It's like a new language. It's a new hearing. It's a new seeing. So I even say too, when we're entering into this space, as best you can, allow your ego to relinquish the concepts that it thinks it knows about what true vision is, what true hearing is, what true feeling is. Because people get caught up with, well, I'm not really feeling like anything in my heart. And it's like people can get a little literal with it. So it's almost like kind of going onto a journey with each different person, because each of us has our own different DNA blueprint, kind of like what we were talking about earlier. So these sessions can activate that stuff as well.
That's beautiful, because that's exactly how I figured it. I was telling you a little bit earlier, I worked with a psychic for 14 weeks. And when we were working together, her doing what she does, so well. And, we were doing all these on phone calls, and I would have this vision, and she would say, hey, you know what you just had? And like, it was so wild because of course we're on a phone. She had no idea that I was seeing anything, but she would just know intuitively. She'd be like, what you just did and what you just saw was clairvoyance. And I'm like, oh, I totally get that. Right. And so, what I realized that many of the listeners might realize too, if they get into this work, is that a lot of these kind of things, they can seem kind of out there, but all of us experience it, yet we've never been taught it exists. And so like, there's actually been an experiment where like, if something's there, but no one else recognizes it's there, you will end up believing it's not there either. Right. And so like, if something is very common, but it's not talked about, it's very rare that people are going to even know how to talk about it or that it's a thing. Right. They'll just think like, they might not even think about it. They might just say like, oh, it's just the way I am. Because for me, what I realized after that was there's this thing I do. And I was going to ask you about closing your eyes because I knew exactly what you were doing, because I've noticed Chris does that a lot. Chris closes his eyes. Mine is I look up to the left. And I've always heard that clairvoyance is a look up to the left, like when you're channeling clairvoyance. And so that was a really interesting thing for me too. And I've heard clairsentience, you close your eyes. And there's certain times where I will like close my eyes and I'm like, oh, is this clairsentience? And it's very interesting, especially for me, because being a mental projector, I have this story, right, of not being attached to my feeling body as much. And it's been interesting to realize how that's been proven wrong with my ability to like have clairsentience and feel into things. And, I think for a lot of people, like one of the most like easy examples for a lot of people to understand is like, if you walk into a room, right, nothing's said, but you just feel kind of weird, right? Like that is one of these senses, right? Like whether you want to say it's clairsentience or however someone wants to describe it, but I want people to recognize that we all have these abilities. They're all different, right? I think of them like video game characters where some of us have the speed all the way up. Some of us balanced out speed with traction. Some of us put braking all the way up for corners, right? Yes. But at the end of the day, we're all driving cars, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It's so interesting because the room thing, like some channelers, there's a spectrum of it. And basically it seems like the information that I tap into is more in the quantum field, quantum realm, universal mind, whatever we want to call it. And there's all different types of information systems. So whether you want to say angelic, extraterrestrial, or other sets of beings, I refer to those as just different sets of information systems. And each of these different information systems emits different frequency. And with clairsentience, because, and I said this recently on my Instagram, but we are about 60% water. And thereby, if you can really begin to slow and quiet things down, particularly your nervous system, you can get really, really still. And then the fascia, the deep tissue, the muscular body will sort of start to release and thereby open. And then when frequencies are coming in from different information systems that I may be sensing, the frequencies resonate through my vessel, my being, my information system. And the resonance is like tied in with water and electricity, and the life force, the prana, is the kundalini energy, which is electric. So we have like electricity, water, these receptor centers that can receive frequency. And one of the things that I started to, I guess, learn on my own in connecting with what you were saying about no one taught us, no one showed us the way, whatever. One of the big things I say is it's so important for all of us to go inward and tune into our own beingness, because it's very much likely that each one of us is going to almost have to carve our own way or find our own way, because it's such a finely tuned thing for each of us to attune to these subtle, again, frequencies or energies. And just for anyone who's like, what do you mean by frequency? What do you mean by resonance, resonating, subtle bodies? Like frequency, you can just think about it as light. We always hear love and light in this industry, and love is the highest vibration, and light, working with it, light is like the information. So it's almost like masculine, like information, the mind of God, and then love being the more feminine yin aspect. And it's so important to also know when the frequency is coming in to see if it does have the love frequency embedded within it. And resonance is like, so when frequency moves through something, it can create like a vibratory sensation.
Response, yeah.
And I think we mentioned this on the last podcast, but like, you know, those cymatic plates.
Yes.
It's kind of like where if you are sitting in stillness or quiet and you allow your third eye to kind of release and open, and one easy way to do that is get still and release all the tension in the body, close the eyes. And I also look up as well, because now in my mind,
yes.
I go this, but, cause it will start to kind of exercise and get it going. But when it comes in and you're feeling it, it will match with the third eye. And usually if you're still and in enough of a focused state, the cymatics of the frequency coming in will show a level of imagery that will need to be translated by the person. So in my seat, that would be me. And it's said through me to the individual, and they, in their own senses that go beyond the five, understand it. So the senses that are beyond the surface ones are hearing that and it's being spoken to. And so even in just that, they're like, oh, it's back there, or it's right there. Like, yes. I heard, and I think in that space all the time.
Yes.
And I'm like, exactly.
Yes. You know, it's so funny you mentioned that, because literally as I'm looking up to the left, like I've always described this with, you know, different medicines I use and things like that, that it feels like even when I'm just meditating or whatever, that it feels like the top of my head has come off, and now I'm able to access like just right out here. It's never like in the ether way out there. It's like literally right from here. And so it's so funny you mentioned that, because again, that comes into contact with the other bodies as well, the etheric body and the following bodies. And so it's very interesting you mentioned that, because I've never heard anyone else like mention grabbing like from right there.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting you mentioned that. And I think that, for a lot of people, like these kind of things are really helpful, because otherwise they just don't know what they don't know, and these things are so valuable. And what I've found too is that even with meditating and things like that, like the idea is sympathetic resonance in a lot of ways, right? Like lowering or hiring your frequency, right? Raising your frequency to a certain level where all of a sudden you harmonize with some other frequency out there that's already existing in the unified field or the quantum realm. And when you resonate with that, all of a sudden now all the ideas start coming, right? Ideas from a higher place, And so it's very interesting you mentioned that, because it's so funny talking about this stuff, because a lot of people, they're like, what are you talking about, right? Because it's more qualitative in nature. It's much harder to measure. But the same way, then I use this analogy often for these kind of people, if anyone happens to be listening, I bet they're not listening to this podcast, but if anyone here is like, wait, what are you talking about? Things that are, hard to measure, but they still exist. It's like, well, we all know that love exists, right? We have love for something, or hopefully at least two things in our life: people, places, things, etc. Can we measure in units of love how much we love one thing compared to another? We might know that we have love for, a very romantic partner in our life more than someone we just met, but we have love for both of them, right? So we might know it's more or less, or like more tuned in, but we can't measure it. Yet even scientists understand that love exists because they experience it, right? And so I think that part of the dichotomy that's challenging in the modern day world is that we prioritize like, well, where's the research? As if like science and research is the end all be all. And I understand what the point of it is, right? Like we don't always want to be just out in the ether all the time, but we have to understand that we only see 4% of visible reality. And that's what science says. So if science is saying that we only see 4%, well, then it's also saying that we're not seeing 96% of what's there, right? Now, a lot of this is probably just science yet to actually be discovered, right? Or written down. The same way the light bulb was crazy until now it's in every room and everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So it's very interesting with these things, because I really think that similar to Bitcoin in 2011, where people were like, that's not going to be a thing. I think this whole spiritual movement right now is very similar, right? We're like, yes, there's a lot of us out there just like experimenting, saying things that we know to be true. And it's been great over the years to see a lot of this stuff, corroborated by scientific research. The biology of belief that Bruce Lipton does, Joe Dispenza's work, all of these individuals are now starting to give credibility to this field. And it's so important, because not that I ever needed to see a scientific study to credibilize what I've experienced, but it's nice now that when I talk about it and that one person is like, where's the research? I'm like, here you go. You research nut,
Yeah. And it's interesting because as you're saying that, immediately, and particularly with in the breathwork last night, part of one thing that I was really immersed in and have been from a very young age was the psyche. And directly to your point, and for anyone who's listening, which I'm sure everyone who's listening has one of the clairs tapped into, or all of them, or whatever, or sensitive, empathic, and totally wanting to know, explore more. Some people who have abilities can start to tune into the ego collective mind. And that was something I tapped at one point. I'd say around, I think this started way younger, but I guess just when I became more conscious of it was probably in my 20s, where the best way I can describe it is you feel like you're swimming in the ocean of the subconscious. And again, being empathic or highly sensitive or super clairsentient, you can feel like you're just getting inundated and you're getting hit and you're like, what's mine, what's not? And especially if there's any trauma of a critical voice, or a scared trauma voice that's programmed into the mind, that keeps replaying the fear or keeps replaying the control, it can almost be like this battle between sensating all that there is, and then also having this like brutalized little inner child, this trauma aspect of the brain, battling these two things. And so going back to the ego collective aspect, a lot of what can happen is, I guess getting more into mind control, MK Ultra stuff. These realms, the ego collective, can get tapped by these higher control,
like archons,
minds. Yeah. And I started to notice, and I could just look at groups of people or certain demographics or certain types of people and certain types of businesses and recognize the almost like the puppet, the mind controlling technology. But then I also had this other aspect of myself that was like, no one's talking about this. This must be just made up in my head. And even if I did bring it up, people would be like, you're overthinking it, or you're really sensitive, or I don't know what you're talking about. And I really barely brought it up to many people, but the science stuff, and I love science. I don't read about it at all, but like there's things I have that validate spirit and spirit, science, soul, that's all sort of coming together, I think now. But one of the things that science in one way, I guess, has done is created that more controlling or like a threshold mind aspect that sort of goes like, zzz, 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 like boxes in these concepts that might not have specific statistical data and clinical things to prove blah, 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 blah. But I'm like, you can't deny when somebody comes in and they can feel your heart, or you are feeling their heart, and they've never been seen before or felt that deeply. And they're like, what is going on? I'm feeling these things in my body. Or sometimes people will come in and they'll start like bawling, crying right away. And then they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know why I'm doing this. And I don't know why I'm doing this part. I just say, okay, that's the part that wants to keep you controlled. It's all the societal, environmental, familial, whatever it was, control, conditioning. Let's just put the volume down on that and allow yourself to experience exactly what you're experiencing. And then it will open the door to who knows what, because it's up to you and God, source, universe, whatever they refer to it as. And whatever that happens between them and that is, I'm so hands off with it, but it is interesting the different layers of tapping in and how you do start to have to find, okay, that frequency is resonating at this level and providing this this specific type of information, and its texture is this, and then this has this resonance, this information's coming in with it, and its texture is this. So like the ego has a specific texture and the subconscious has a specific texture, and they're very different. And sometimes it's a matter of someone coming in and us being like, okay, let's find what your experience of the texture of your ego is. And so that's kind of like going way back to the first question when you said what would be the way that people could start to tune into this. And that's another one, is like, let's find the texture or the buzzing sound, or like the thing, the sensation that the hyperactive intellect or ego mind has been kind of like blaring out almost. So.
No, it makes perfect sense, and kind of what I feel there and see there is like, if you know someone's voice and you're in a dark room, but you hear their voice, you can more accurately assume that that's that person. Now, it's obviously someone could fake the voice and things like that, but with the ego, it's just about understanding the voice of it so that you know when it's in control, right? Or in like the forefront. And like we were talking about before we hit record, it's not that the ego is the enemy, right? It's not any of these things, right? But it's very similar to like, if you own a dog and you're a bad dog owner, the dog's probably going to get really frustrated and be all over the place, right? Pit bulls get like this rap a lot. But it's not the dog, it's the owner, right? Or maybe the upbringing if the owner adopted him or her. And so at the end of the day, like if we want to actually like work with the ego, if we actually want to have a fulfilling life, we're not going to just obliterate the ego. No matter how many psychedelic journeys we try to go on, it's always going to come back because it's an integral piece of separating into the illusion of I, right? Now, in Buddhism, they talk about how when we're born, we're just completely enthralled by the all, right? We have no separation yet. And then over time, there becomes this very natural and mandatory separation, right? Where we become this I. But they also talk about this reunionizing, right? Of knowing that you're not the I, but also experiencing your life as the I, right? And it's kind of like if you're a parent and your kid wants to play like an imaginary game, you're not like, hey, it's not real, right? Like you actually play it with them, but you know it's a game, right? They might not yet, but you know it's a game, but you still get to enjoy it. And I think that's like a lot of what I've noticed with the ego and being able to like, see when it wants me to do stuff, right? Like if I'm in the gym and it's like one more set and I'm like, okay. And maybe sometimes I go, yeah, thank you for motivating me. Maybe I'm tired today, right? Other days I'm like, no, I don't need that extra set, right? So just about being able to discern what that voice is, not to reprimand it or talk down on it or say it's an asshole or anything like that, but just so you can use discernment and go, is that information right now helping me?
Yes.
If not, it's a cue if it happens a lot, right? If people are stuck in stinking thinking or these kind of things, which happens to me quite frequently, it's a sign that the level of thinking that created the perceived problem is not going to be the one that gets me out of it. And so from that point, I'm not going to try to bicker or argue or even have a discussion with the ego. I'm going to tap into a different frequency where the ego gets pushed back, right?
Yes.
Because I think that's what a lot of people, mess up is they try to like, once they notice they're in stinking thinking, they try to figure it out, right?
Yeah.
And Albert Einstein said it best, you can't solve the same problem with the same level of thinking that created it, And so it's very interesting. Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to let you all know that the doors are officially open for the Conscious Cannabis Collective. And as such, this is the last week you can sign up and receive all of the bonuses we're currently including. This is the last time I will be personally onboarding those of you who sign up with a complimentary one-on-one session, and you'll have the ability to get the Grow with Cannabis course for free during this limited time. For more info on how you can take advantage of this offer, head down to the show notes for this episode and secure your spot today, as we only have so many spots left and they are filling up quickly. Now back to the show.
Yeah, and it's like a lot of times in my breathwork classes, people will come up to me after and be like, oh, this person next to me was having this really deep, intense experience, and I just sent them love and light, through my palms or whatever. Like I was thinking good thoughts and sending them their way. And so this is like an example of kindly talking to that person. But actually, when I'm talking to them, I'm actually talking to the ego that is talking to me through them in that moment, because many people are more in that space.
Yeah.
And so I say, how did you feel in that moment before you went outside of self to try to manage something going on outside of you that actually triggered something? More often than not, it triggers discomfort in people and fear when someone's having like a big traumatic release during breathwork, which happens every time. More often, it can be somebody who's a little bit more of a controller or a fixer, and they're kind of always riding on this like surface wave, but then not really pausing and going in and asking why they continue to leave self to distract from a discomfort and pain that keeps driving them to actually leave and focus and fix other people, which is deserving not only themselves, but the other person. So I say to that ego piece, it's in good intention that you wanted to go help somebody for sure. But in this moment, you don't need to run away from trust. If you can just sit within and stay still in this body and trust that the highest source is taking care of all of us, that this situation going on with this other person and all of their source, their guides, is being taken care of. So instead of having sent love and light and whatever you were wanting to send, in fact, let's send that to you yourself, because it seems like that is what's needed. And maybe the ego wanted to quickly distract from that because it doesn't know any better. So we'll just lovingly guide you back in so that all is well. I don't have to have fear. I can keep surrendering and trusting, even if this person is screaming and crying or rolling around, or maybe they're flailing their arms and their arm whacked me. Like, it's definitely a practice to come into tight circles or group spaces to process together and to release together, because the more that we come together in that way, there's that communal practice, but then the community comes together more strongly when each and every individual stands more firmly in their sovereignty and decides with strong intention before, I will not divert from my path in this session. I will stay still within self. I will not cross my boundaries or impose on the free will of anybody else. And I will stay focused in my breath. And the more firm rooted and grounded that I am in this space, the more I'm actually lifting the frequency of the group and help and I guess in a sense contributing in a helpful way. So it's always just like the ego is trying its hardest and wants to do this and wants to do that. And it's like finding ways to gently coax it back in but in a loving way, exactly like you said, not beating it up, not yelling at it, or not shaming and like guilting and whatever else.
Yeah. I mean, you said it perfectly. And what came to me was, again, the analogy of the dog owner, right? Like if the dog, right? Like if someone comes to your house, the mailman, right? The dog goes out and bites the mailman. Is the dog a psychopath? No, it thought it was protecting you, right? That's why it went and did that. Now, was it the right action for that moment? No, but it was misled in whatever type of training or whatever, or lack of training, to believe that I protect my owner no matter what. It doesn't yet know what is an enemy and what is actually a friend, right? Like when that response is actually appropriate and when it's not appropriate. So if we can retrain the dog to realize that like not just anyone coming up to me is danger, right? Like then we can actually work on that. And that's very similar to the ego. And what I tell everyone is, listen, you can get frustrated all you want. You can blame it on the world around you, but your ego is yours and yours alone to fix, right? You can victim shame yourself and say it's the way I was raised, yada, yada. Listen, those things happened. They might suck. They might not be things that you would have wanted to happen. But when you start realizing they're like, holy shit, there's things in there that I'm not exactly excited about, right? That aren't exactly helping me. It's up to you and you only to fix it. And within that, there's so many lessons that one can learn, right? Because again, having the ability to discern between your ego and like every other part of yourself is a vital skill, right? It's not only useful for people that are like, oh, I actually had a great ego and, I just wanted to learn about it anyway, right? Like one of the best ways I've learned to distinguish the ego is that it rationalizes. So it uses stories, right? So what you were saying about like, hey, that person next to me was having this release. They hit me, yada, yada. It starts like telling stories, right? Let's even say the story is that person hit me. Are they okay? Oh my God, I had to come up and talk to you, blah, blah, blah. And it's not that person should have known that like the best thing to do is just to be calm. Because again, none of us really learned that. But again, it's like understanding like, oh, that's my ego trying to keep me safe in terms of like, I didn't want to sit with myself. So therefore I invented a story that I was keeping this person safe by going and talking instead of tuning in to like what's coming up in me as that person's having their release, because they have surrendered, at least to a certain degree, where they're allowing themselves to like emote like that and have the flailing arms and these kind of things. In my own experience, when I've gone through breath work, things like that, and there's been someone around me, especially when I first got into this, it was the hardest part was that it was very uncomfortable for me because I was jealous. I wanted to be able to like cathartically release like that, but I had a lot of judgment, not from, again, I could say, yeah, it came from so-and-so, whatever. It was just stuff I had, right? I'd rather not even care where it came from because all that matters is I solve it now and work with it, right? But it was very interesting because again, I noticed it right away. I was like, oh, I feel really uncomfortable around people that are doing that because I don't know how to do that. And then I think there's something wrong with me. So therefore, it's like, oh, I'm just going to leave the room. But it wasn't that like that person was annoying, which might be the story the ego is telling me. It's actually like I'm feeling very lack of, self-worth or self-esteem or something because I think that if I'm not having that release, I'm then doing it wrong, or I can't do it, or I'm never going to be able to, insert the blank here, release emotion, feel my feelings, etc. And therefore, that's going to lead to another story. And before you know it, now your whole day is ruined, right? And you're like, I'm a failure, right? And so it's really interesting how these things happen. And again, like very similar to meditation, what I've noticed is it's not about like, oh, I've cured it. Now I always know when my ego is at front. Maybe if you reach enlightenment, whatever that is, but for me, it's just like meditating, right? What do they say when you're meditating? They're like, when thoughts arise, don't give them any notice. Just go back to the mantra, right? You don't judge them. You don't think that you're doing it wrong. You just go back to the mantra. And over time, you train yourself to be able to hear the thoughts and come back to your center. And that's exactly, I think, what we're talking about too. And why meditating is so powerful is because those thoughts, right, wherever they're coming from, whether it's the ego, you're picking up on things, whatever, it's important to be able to, even in the storm, be able to find the eye.
Yes.
So important.
And as you're saying that, I was getting this really strong image of the texture of the ego. So I'll just explain this so people can really get this visual, where I guess we can just use this breathwork group example where the ego can be trained in a way to supplement our manifestation. And again, we're creators of our reality. So what we manifest, we can choose. But most people, because they don't see where their sovereignty is because they haven't been shown, they don't know that they have the choice. And victim mentality is one of those like sheaths that can be very tricky to perforate for some people. But like with this one group example, if we're in a space where we're pulling in negative energy, let's say because the ego is like, I'm not willing to take responsibility for myself in this moment because I don't like to feel uncomfortable or unsafe. And instead of feeling uncomfortable or unsafe right now, I'm going to jump ship, try to fix this person or save them, or direct all of my energy toward them, almost blaming them in some unconscious way, or maybe there's a little victim in there, who knows? But if that's the primary operating energy that the ego is within, it does then tend to drive that person to be making it more about them in a not so positive way, and therefore pulling in more of that energy of, I need to fix, I need to change, I need to adjust. And that, if you're pulling and magnetizing that in because of maybe not meditating or having mindfulness or awareness of all actions, you'll keep getting these things pulled in towards you. Like, I'm agitated by that person, or this person's driving this way, or this. And most people don't make the choice to live in joy and humor and happiness. And because it is a choice. And once we decide, okay, if that's what I want, if that's what I'm going to choose, every time my ego is not kind of in that place, I'm going to see what's going on, feel it all, acknowledge all of it, and then allow it to be released, because it isn't about obviously bypassing. It isn't about, skipping it over. It's like you kind of have to go down this little like almost little mini rabbit hole. I guess it's like, I think you and I really relate in that way. I think that's why we really completely get each other, because we are both psychonauts.
Yes.
And I know psychedelics or not, everybody can be a psychonaut.
100%.
It's like walking through your day. People are like, well, what are the tools? Like, what can we do to be more this or that? And I'm like, be your own psychonaut. Yes. Start to enjoy the process, because you're getting clues all day, every day for what these things are trying to resolve. But if we're distracting ourselves, eating like crap, watching too much TV, not taking care of our body, whatever the distraction is, then there's that unconscious, stuck, programmed this robot. Why am I sick?
Yes.
Why do I feel like this? Why am I fighting? Why am I caught in loops? I'm just, making fun. It's not like it's judging people. It's like all of our experience.
Yeah, we've all been there,
But yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating you say that, because the bleep blorp type thing, because I can literally call it out of myself when I'm way too just structured and the ego is in complete control, and again, it's like in that type of mindset or state of being, if you stay in that, you're going to attract more of that, you know? And again, it's like the law of resonance, right? You attract what you are, not what you want, right? And that's like, I understand how lucrative, and maybe not lucrative is the right word, but how attractive it is today, especially with the media and everyone doing this, to like assume that you're a victim. But the bad news of that is that no one's going to come save you, right? And so like for anyone listening right now, realize that we all get to work on this. It's part of the human experience. It's part of like, we're not here to color inside the lines and be super prim and proper. We're here to be messy as hell. And as Hunter S. Thompson said, slide it into the grave sideways, yelling, what a fucking ride, right? Like if we wanted perfection, we would have never left there. Now, whatever there is, it could be God, unified field, whatever, right? But we're here having this illusion of separation to forget, to mess up, right? Because actually those mess ups and everything are what we came here to experience, so we could discern, get the answer right, learn the karmic debt, and actually gain from it, and be able to hopefully not have to have another incarnation, or at least the next one we'll hopefully have figured the one lesson out we were here, or maybe many of the lessons we were here to figure out, you know? And I love this stuff because it's, first of all, it's practical in the sense of like, hey, you want to be happy? You want joy in life? You need to learn this. Hey, you want to go super spiritual and think about karma and everything? You need to learn this, right? So whether you want to look at it in a quantitative way of like, do you want to make sure that you don't have anxiety or depression or any of these mental health issues? Cool. This is very important. Do you want to be, you know, one with God? Also equally important. Same action. Depending on what your goal is, it still applies. And I think that's one of the most powerful things about this is that, and again, for this podcast, I'm sure everyone here is fine with this, but like when I talk to people about this that are not exactly in the spiritual realm, sometimes they roll their eyes and I'm like, listen, I don't care if your, you know, incentive is the same one as mine. This is going to matter for you. I guarantee it. Like you want to be a better husband or wife, you want to be a better father or mother, you want to be a better business owner, you want to be a better fill in the blank here. This is very useful to understand.
Yeah. And it's interesting because like new age spirituality, like there's so much going on, and especially with the ego, it's, and I know it's a hero's journey. Joseph Campbell, the journey, the what's the
journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step.
Well, and also
that came to me immediately.
He refers to hero with 1,000 faces. And I say this because if we're not doing our shadow work, if we're not exploring our ego, if we're not going on psychonautical journeys of all the different realms, then we are being ignorant of self. And the more we know self, the more we get into this seat of what you seek is seeking you, which is actually so steeped in love. And I remember, and this is so key to anyone that I see, I'm like, until it doesn't matter what I say. In fact, take everything I say with a grain of salt, use your own discretion, and take what resonates, leave what doesn't. One of the biggest experiences I had in a meditation was when I was told, and not like through verbal words, and this is like, I want to really speak to people who are really wanting to understand like telepathy and clairvoyance and whatever. It was this all-encompassing knowing wrapped in my body, in my vision, vibration, I guess you can say. And it was like, Mary, what you are seeking is seeking you in this infinity loop. And I had this like almost, I guess, ego release, or just kind of like, I was like, wow. And again, it's so subtle because it seems like it's not that big of a deal, but to know some earnest part, probably desperate, suffering, wanting freedom, wanting levity in my life is like, has been seeking since I can remember. And then that aspect of me that was seeking reflected back to me in a moment, I'm seeking you too. And it was in a loving way. And it really was that aspect of the ego, similar to the story you told me before, which would be awesome to hear again, because it's so key, because I was like, wow, it was like the higher self, but like showing me you can train your ego to keep seeking that which you desire.
Mm.
And if you align your conscious will for like a higher order that's actually driving everything behind you already,
Yes.
Then it will slowly start to show you back like, I love you too. I've been seeking you all along. Like you're not any of these things that this other part of you has been saying, but there's nothing wrong with that other part of you because it's just trying to survive. Yeah. And if we're on this earth plane, we're supposed to be souls evolving. We have no choice. It's part of being in this dualistic, polarized reality is for our soul to evolve. There's no choice in it. So once we stop kicking and screaming and enjoying ourselves a little bit more, which I think in knowing you, I've actually really loved experiencing your, shout out to Ryan, your like joy and levity. And I think that's why, because we both go really far out.
Yes.
But my process has been a little scary at certain points in my life, just with spontaneous Kundalini awakenings. Anyone out there who's experienced that, you're not alone. You're not crazy. There's nothing wrong with you. It will pass. And sometimes it can take years. Sometimes it can take months. So if you're on year 3, it's all good. That was my story too.
Yeah.
So
keep going.
Keep going. Don't give up. But I don't know if you had scary stuff, but it seems like you had more of a smooth sail.
For sure. Like
which is so key though, because you're like the, anyway, keep going.
No. Don't keep going because I want to hear this.
Well, what I was going to say was, because I can learn I've learned energetically, because Ryan's also very telepathic. He might just not.
Guilty as charged, so sue me.
So like an example would be if someone is in space with him or whatever, and we're going into deeper realms, or there's a breathwork circle going on or whatever, people are sitting with medicine. It's so important for there to be someone there who hasn't had terrifying experiences, who hasn't had really scary, spontaneous Kundalini awakenings and like borderline psychosis and splitting and all these shadow aspects coming up, and that telling them that they're literally nuts and all these things. When somebody's soul or karmic whatever in this lifetime was just to kind of have a different entry point, they in a telepathic and energetic and experiential way can transmit that and emit that in a way beyond words that's like, you're good. Like, yeah, I could see that it was a little rough and that must have sucked a little bit, but we're here right now. We're talking in this moment. Like, you're not there. It's almost like the way that your ego functions and how you describe that one point where it's so intricate and so intelligent and just very and like almost like an engineer that can serve someone whose ego expresses in a different way or whatever, by being like, well, yo, look over here. If you think about it like this, and then that person's ego through the energetic imprint learns, oh, that's true. That's a totally different system. And it is true. I am here now. And it is true. I can have fun with this, even though it has at some points been terrifying. And by the way, the victim mentality can make the terror so much worse, which is even more impetus to realize you're not a victim, not condoning any abuse, not saying it was okay. But the sooner you just resound within yourself, like, I am not the victim. There is no knight in shining armor that's going to come save me. There's no savior outside of me that's going to save me. It's inside me. I trust me. I'm sovereign. I'm strong. I'm powerful. I'm love. What I've been seeking this whole time is also seeking me, and blah, 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 all these things. So your approach of levity and humor and lightness has helped, like it has allowed me to be safe in that space too, because that's so who I am. But it's almost like collectively and then in this space too, people can get so serious or even competitive. Yeah. Where I'm like, that's the biggest illusion of it all, is the competition
the ultimate bypass.
thing.
Yeah. 100%. It's funny you say that because like we were talking about earlier, right, with like this ability to discern, like one of the best ways besides the rationalizing way that I can tell just something is fucky with me is if I'm too serious, I know right away, like I'm not fully me. Like it's almost like when they're like, eat a Snickers, Mary, like you get different when you're hungry, right? Like literally that's like how I can tell, like, and Rachel's so good at pointing out at me. She's like, this isn't a big deal. I'm like, no, it is though, right? Because in that moment, I'm making myself the victim. And I've noticed a lot of this recently. Like I was saying to you earlier, like there's levels to everything in life. And so like what I've noticed is I stay humble enough to realize that even though I understand that I have quite a bit of spiritual knowledge, I also realize that I know nothing in the scheme of things. And it doesn't mean that like just recently I've been coming into this whole new awareness of where my ego has been in shadow, but operating. And this has been since childhood. I mean, actually it started with our session where you brought up, and I'm sure we'll get into a little bit of channeling in a little while, but yes, let's do it. But like when you pointed out to me that when I was, I think 9 and 13, you said I had like what I would probably say in my ignorant language is like a spirit break or something, right? And it started there where I started realizing like I already knew that, right? And this is also the argument for knowing's not enough. I've known these things for a long time. I knew that when I got caught cheating on a test in 3rd grade, right, that I wasn't actually cheating on, but I had no idea how to, I'm not very assertive. Like, that's just not who I am. Like, if someone doesn't want to do something, I'm like, hey man, it's your life, right? Like, I'm not going to push people because I honestly feel like I might be interfering with their karmic debt. But that's also a story. Like, sometimes the role of a leader, the role of anyone in life, the role of a friend, the role of a boyfriend, anything is to like pull a little bit, not to push, right? But to question. And that's what's so great about coaching is that you're not pushing, telling people things, you're pulling by asking questions and hopefully allowing them to figure out how they can get their own answers, but it's interesting to me because if we think about the universe being an eternal child, which is something I truly believe, right? Like kids are like, if we're all God, kids are people that still remember their God without actually having to remember that they're God. Like they just are, right? The Dalai Lama, the people closest to God are some of the most funny individuals, right? That's why I think they say laughter is the best medicine. Why? Because it's a really positive sign, reinforcement that like, you're good, keep going in that direction, right? So for me, what I've noticed is it's very interesting how as kids, we play Marco Polo, we play Warm or Colder. And to me, those 2 games are the best depiction of what you were talking about when it's like what you are seeking is what is seeking you. It's all the signs, the synchronicities, the serendipities. Like, I think for a lot of people in their logical mind, because a lot of times I did this too, if you talk to people about synchronicities, they're like, yeah, that could just be a thing. It's like, well, if there is a realm of spirit, right, and we choose to believe that, what did you expect it would do? Come down and leave you a note on your bedroom, like pillow? Like it's going to speak to you in different ways, things that are very different than our normal waking left brain state of consciousness, right? So I tell everyone, like, don't be naive, like there's this whole other realm. Again, we only see 4% of visible reality, right? So we also know we have extra sensory senses, right? Like, and so if we understand all these things, why would we not expect to get signs and things like that, right? If we're on the right track. I was telling you that since I've been in California, I have been getting nonstop signs. Now, what the question I have, right, that like is curious to me is, was I getting these back in Boston, but I was so stuck in my ego that I didn't notice them. And out here, I have this sense of freedom because I've always felt, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. Boston and the East Coast has its own vibe anyway. It's very like go, 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 very like what can you produce? But what I really think is that the East and West Coast dichotomy that we always think about and talk about and people that have been to both know, Atlantis was on the East Coast. It was a very masculine continent, right? And it actually sank due to a very similar thing that's happening now, an overexertion of masculine energy. But it wasn't divine masculine energy. It was this immature, weird version that now people are labeling toxic masculinity, which it's not. There's just toxic traits. It's ridiculous. Yeah. I won't even get into that whole thing. But on the West Coast, we had Lemuria, right, which is very feminine, very feeling oriented, right? And so it's interesting to me that when I come to California, it almost just feels like immediately when I get here, I just don't have to put the same pressure on myself. I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's past life stuff. I have no idea. All I know is that I feel that. And so whenever I'm here, I start getting all these synchronicities, right? And it again, for me, people always, they're like, well, how do you know what they mean? I'm like, all I know is they feel good. And when I feel good, I follow that feeling, right? And so for me, like last night I was driving home, we saw literally, it was like so funny. Chris is like 777 on the license plate. Then we're like, oh my God, 666. And then literally the same second I looked at the other license plate, 328, which I was born at 327 on 328. So those two numbers all pop up for me all the time. It's just so interesting, right? And I think of it as one big game of warmer, you're getting warmer to what? Who knows, right? But for me, I've never wanted to open my Christmas presents before Christmas morning, right? So I don't want to know what it's leading me to, right? Like, I think for a lot of people, they get stuck on a thirst trap. Where's the science? I want to know the answer. It's like the best things in life are the things that you don't have an answer for. You don't know how are going to turn out, right? If you knew what a first date was going to turn out like, it wouldn't be fun, right? A lot of the fun of a first date is the unknown, and that's one of the biggest like shifts that I've had conscious wise. And it's not all the time, but when I'm in like right now, really high, just beautiful vibe. It's actually the unknown that I'm most excited about. It's the unknown that allows me to realize, like, how do I know that when we walk outside, there's not going to be a bundle of $10 million sitting? Like, I don't know, right? It could be ridiculously low of a chance, but at the same time, how do I know that we're not going to walk outside and see a rainbow? It's all the mystery that I get enthralled in. And so it's so interesting you bring that up about that whole, like, what you seek is seeking you, because that's exactly how I speak about synchronicity and with the comedy and everything. Like, I really feel based on my own experience, and again, you attract what you are. So I've attracted a lot of these people that are very high achievers, very go-getters. And it's a fine line that I ride because I enjoy it. Like, I love pushing myself, but also I have a story around like that I'm not going to be successful if I don't push myself. So I have to be very aware of both, because it's a very fine line between enjoyment and anxiety.
Yes. And when you were saying if you were too much in your ego in Boston and this, like, I'll just say that the more that we can just really get to know our ego and reparent it, relove it, talk to it, because it does block these other visions or these other ways to see beyond these five senses, which it doesn't mean, oh, well, I'm living on Earth. Like, who says I want to see all those other things? And it's not the seeing you think. It's not like trolls running across the street and like leprechauns running up the trees and like scary ghosts. It's not like that. It's
not the upside down.
No, yeah. It's like the more that you align with higher frequencies of love, light, whatever, you're imprinting into the universe that you're going to be more of service to yourself in the highest way and thereby humanity. And therefore you're going to keep getting more clues, more signs, high and vibrational and like-minded people. And so as long as people can just really start to release and trust there's no fear to be had, and that, you can really trust that when you do let go and release all levels of like control that's from a place of lack or fear or victim, that the universe will really bring you a life and people and opportunities that the thinking mind could have never conceived of or brought up. And that's kind of like where the universe has a humor almost, because it's like, sucker, got you.
Exactly.
And you're like, laugh, and you're like, I went through all of that for this. Thank you. But also I'm kind of mad right now.
Weird flex universe.
Weird flex universe. And the other thing that I keep getting pinged to say is how the Venusians actually are able to see into the ultraviolet range. So I say that just because if you want a more like specific, concrete example of seeing with a different vision, if you just think about that, like that's a very different makeup. But at the same time, there are Venusians walking this earth plane. So I don't know, maybe you are, and you need to tune into it, people.
100%, and it's funny too, because for me, like when we talk about this whole idea of understanding the ego, right, and things like that, we understand that if we want to be a good basketball player, it's not just going to happen to us. Sure, we could visualize and get more into the mindset of what being a good basketball player feels like, but ultimately we're going to need to throw the ball a lot of times, right? Like I remember hearing about Kobe Bryant's like practice rituals, right? Like he would get to the gym super early, or the court super early before a game. He'd be shooting hoops. Other players would show up. He'd just be silent doing his thing. They would practice for a couple of hours. They'd leave. He'd still be practicing. They'd come back like 2 hours. He's still practicing, right? So that's the idea of like, if you want to get really good at something, you need to practice it, right? And so like, this is why meditation and breath work and these kind of things are, I think, becoming so popular. And they can almost be kind of like silly today because they're getting so big, but I love it. Like, yes, we'll all like joke. And I love JP Sears' work with the whole spiritual community because, again, laughter is the best medicine. Like, for instance, people call me Shaggy all the time in comments. This girl looks like Shaggy. What the fuck do I care if I look like Shaggy? I don't care because I love myself, right?
Yes.
And so like, I love when people do that because I'm like, thank you for the laugh.
Yeah.
Like, if you can't laugh at yourself and the work you do, then what can you really do? Because at the end of the day, I really feel like all of this is one big cosmic joke, And I really believe in the saying that nothing you do matters and it's very important you do it, right? So, again, at the end of the day, we're here to do whatever we really want to do. But for me, I'd rather follow this and follow something that over time, if we want to compare it to a scientific study, every single time I have followed this, I didn't know where the hell I was going. It wasn't easy, but I always ended up in the right spot. This made a lot more sense and always led me the wrong way. What am I going to choose? The worst option or the better option? So even if we want to look at this in a very quantitative way, I know choosing this just works better for me, right? We can talk about it in the spiritual terms. We can also talk about it like, hey, in your life, what have you got better results with? Following your mind or following your heart, right? Now, there are times where like, for instance, the ego, if we want to prove right now that it's not an enemy, right? Like, for instance, if we are in traffic, right, and all of a sudden this car is coming, do we want to come from our heart or do we want the mind to do its thing and be like, hey, there's that thing, boom, boom, and make us have a decision, And so, it's not the enemy, but very similar to how Western medicine right now we're realizing is not the tool for prevention. The ego is not the tool for living a fulfilling life. It is a tool for sometimes staying safe, quantifiably, moving through data, computer programs, being able to drive, things like that, having the separation of I, right? Like having this illusion, but it's not necessarily the tool for everything, right? And again, the whole idea is to have a full toolkit, not to only pick one tool. Like a hammer is amazing. You can't build a house without one. But if you try using it for every part of building a house, you're not going to really build part of a house. There's going to be holes everywhere, right? Like holes in drywall, And so, yeah.
And it's interesting because as you're saying that too, when you really tune into whatever you feel your main clair ability is, or at least just try to focus kind of going down the line. All right, I'm going to see if it's clairsentience this week. I'm just going to really focus on that. Once you start to work with one, it can trigger another and then they start to work together and then the third and then the fourth open up.
Like the Power Rangers,
Yeah, exactly. And then the other thing, when you mentioned the traffic, one thing that another visual for anyone listening, just with regard to the energetic field, when someone has road rage, like this is how I experience it. Or if they're tailgating me. Usually what I see across the board is it's somebody who's in an unconscious state. So maybe they're super ungrounded. They're running late for work. Such a strong take energy, like take from the field, like vampiric. And it creates this big bubble around their car that's pushing against everybody else in the field. And it's a very disruptive, stressful energy output. And so when I feel it, I go back to this same thing where I'm like, if we could just see how much we are creating and imprinting and putting out certain energies into the field and how far it does extend, and how when you are sending something out, you are sending a signal out, and depending on what signal it's frequenting at, it will bring back that same frequenting signal in some other way. And a lot of times too, it can be people who are texting and they're looking at their phone and they look up last minute and they slam on their brakes. So that can be felt in a different, again, way where these are all energies where the unconsciousness is making these people be in a space of, it's all about me and I'm just going to keep taking because I don't realize I'm creating my reality And it's the unconsciousness also creates this level of, and I don't really care about anyone around me because I'm either a victim or I'm in pain or I'm suffering, but I don't want to slow down and take the time to think about it. So I'm just going to stress out every day, road rage, text and drive, put other people in danger, whatever. It's like we're all sentient beings. And I think from these planetary systems and extraterrestrial races that offer certain levels of information to us, it's all about coming into unity and harmony. And so when we come into a more harmonious state within ourselves, we output a very beautiful, sacred, geometric shaping and our own bubble out into the universe, and we'll be gifted back something just as beautiful. So it's like really empowering anybody listening that you are loved and worthy. And if it feels hard right now, just trust it's going to get better if you just keep trudging forward. There were so many times where I felt like giving up and questioning my sanity and just so many other things. And so if you're feeling that, or if you've ever felt that, you're not alone. Like, we're all in this together. And obviously thanks to Ryan for creating this platform, and like talking about all this stuff.
Yeah. It's so important because I think that a lot of us are waking up to these things, and very similar to what you said earlier, like I've always been in like the interesting circles, right? Like I've always gotten along with everyone, but in school I was a metalhead, right? Why? Because it was on the fringe, right? Exactly. That's one of the things we connected on, which was so cool. And like, so like I've always been kind of in this like weirder side. I've always just had this intuitive sense of like, man, like it's way weirder than this, and that's completely cool. Like, you know what I mean? And so like, I think for a lot of people, though, they maybe had more of like luckily my parents were always like my dad was very silly. My mom is very silly. Like they weren't necessarily spiritual, but maybe they actually were without knowing it. You know what I mean? Like my dad was always like one to crack a joke, even at the funeral, things like that. So like, I think they brought me up, like maybe I'm sure they didn't know this, right? Like bringing me up in a way of just helping me realize like nothing's really that serious. It's almost like the way I think about it is this, right? Like kind of the way that I was raised was to think about essentially a trip to Disneyland, right? So imagine that all of us that are currently incarnated on planet Earth, and anyone that ever has been incarnated into Disneyland, right? And so we show up there, we don't really know, we have these parents that are guiding us, bringing us on rides, etc. We're starting to get older, we're going on more and more rides. And then at a certain point, people leave, right? Our friends, our family, they go back home. They go to hang out. They're like, I'm done with Disneyland, right? Now, it might suck for us in the moment, like, damn, like I wish Mary was here to ride this roller coaster with me, but you still know you're going to see him when you're home. Like that's how I've taken life a lot. And so like, for me, it's not that I don't mourn death. It's not that I try to, erase or bypass my humanness. Like when my dad passed, it was fucking rough. When my grandmother passed, fucking rough. Friends passed. But knowing that like it's going to be okay and that they're okay has helped me a lot. And so like being raised in that type of environment, and again, like my parents never put an emphasis on any of this, like they just really allowed me to be myself, like talk to imaginary friends, do whatever. Part of the reason I'm probably so good in psychedelic space too is because when I go there, yeah, I've had some really interesting challenges. They haven't all been fun by any means, but I've found the fun within them. Once I broke through and I was like, dude, I took myself so seriously right there. And I noticed like, oh, I was in that seriousness mode again, And so it's been interesting to be able to host this podcast and whatnot and have so many people reach out going like, hey, thank you. I thought I was crazy, And I'm like, no, you're not crazy. If anything, like the rest of the world is crazy because I'm sure on some level they're feeling it, but they're like, just like, nope, like they're just like jamming the computer closed and be like, I don't see anything, And so it's very interesting stuff. And like this kind of stuff just really reminds me why it's so important to talk about this kind of stuff, because we never know the impact of our actions, of our conversations, of the way we look at people, of the door we hold and things like that. And my hope is that even if one person hears this that goes, holy shit, it really isn't that bad. You know what? Like maybe people don't understand me, but you know what? Yeah, there are people out there that will. And you know what? Maybe the people that aren't, that are falling out of my life, are creating the necessary space for me to have new relationships, And again, that perspective is always there. It's simple. It's not easy, right? Like I get stuck in my shit quite often, right? But it's always so funny to me when it turns around and I'm like, oh my God, it was right there the whole time,
I know, like right there.
Yeah.
The other thing, this makes me think of Shlomo's friend. What was his name again last night?
Ben.
Because it ties in exactly with this example. So I had a really interesting conversation with him because he wrote some notes about, did he tell you about our conversation? he was tripping out. He was like,
he was having a blast.
He was like, he DM'd me and was like, I'm really tripped out because you like whatever, said all these things. And I was like, I do this for a living. So, but anyway, he was like, he mentioned, and maybe this is some of the Boston stuff because it seems like there's a similarity, but he was like, this guy I'm referencing mentioned in his experience in this breathwork event last night that he struggles with what's the point of everything kind of thing. And it affects his ability to have drive or it makes him procrastinate, whatever these things. And I had like 4,000 light bulbs go off. And I was like, I have to talk to this guy. And we were having this roundabout conversation and he mentioned how his parents, he kind of just casually was like, gosh, I just feel so lucky because my parents have such a coherent relationship and it was so carefree and all these things. And I was like, ding, 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 lottery. That's so key.
Yes.
And I said, there may be this sense of not having a purpose or maybe feeling lost or whatever. But if you can start to create more, because he's clearly an artist, and I was like, I see that.
Yeah, really gifted one too. I saw his drawings. I'm like, dude, those are amazing.
Yeah, and he just like he exudes this very artsy kind of like non-linear vibe for sure.
Yeah, and
that can get lost in ungroundedness, like where he can probably feel like I could just go up here and who cares, but he's saying, he said through his words, but I don't want to be here anymore. I really do want to like have more of a drive or whatever it is. And so I said, part of your medicine actually is the fact that you've never had an issue with being carefree and chill and just like, it's all good. And I was like, I've been the polar opposite, like so much fear, like lots of trauma, you know, things that really mess with my mind and made life seem not as carefree at times and not as joyful. And people like you must express your sense of carefree and it's all good, and how, yes, you may feel like you've slipped so far into that, but then showing people how, what you had to tap into to bring you back in to start expressing more. And he was like, so are you telling me I need to like tap into more of my artistry? And I said, yes, exactly. Because you have to out-create the energy that is creating and using you, which is telling you in a sneaky way, there's no point. What's the point? Just give up. I'm like, that's a creative, potent energy that's telling you in a creative, very subtle, very chill way, like, just give up, whatever. You're not worthy and this and that. And there's other stuff too, for sure. But in a sense, I just said, your medicine just may look different than a lot of other people who are like, don't be fearful, don't be scared, don't be whatever. You can tap into that space of being carefree and humorous like you and joyful, because people like me and millions of other people need to have people like that who are like, yo, this is how you do, this is how carefree vibes.
Yes.
This is how we get down with joy. And I have this carefree part of me, but it has to be brought forward like people like him. I just felt it with him next to me. And I was like, he has so much medicine. He just doesn't even know it. Like he's like, because of his carefree nature, he's kind of like, well, yeah, maybe, but who cares? And I'm like, yeah, but I'm telling you that to care, because that's real. Like, that's it.
Yeah. No, 100%. Because I think for most of us, we've been trained that what matters is like what we can produce. So if we don't have something that we produced with the time we spent, then it's all for nix, right? But in reality, we are human beings, not human doings, you know? And so I think like individuals like him, my buddy Danny, who he reminded me so much of, like, you know, they're fun to be around because at the ground level, they're like, hey man, there's like Ramdas says, there's nowhere you need to go. There's nowhere you need to be. There's no point to really anything. And that's the whole idea, is you get to choose your own adventure. You know, there's not like a specific, like I heard this one time, like our lives intersect at the corner of free will and destiny. And what that essentially means is that, yes, we have free will, right? And yes, we have destinies, right? But there's infinite different destinies depending on what decisions we make every microsecond. And yet there's one of those paths that's like the highest and greatest version, right? Like the jackpot, if you will, right? Doesn't mean you're going to go home broke if you hit the other ones, right? But there's like one that's like a full send. one of the challenges for everyone in different ways, but talking about him, and this is kind of similar for me too, is that as a projector in human design, for a long time, and I was talking to my buddy Marcus this morning about this because he's a 5/1 projector too. He's like, brother, we're here to make life more efficient. We're not here to work the same way the generators are. We're there to show them like, dude, you could do it this way and save like 3 hours. Like I always thought, oh yeah. It's funny because
that's interesting.
Yes.
That's what you're showing me.
Yeah. Because literally like, and I'll tell you like how this happened, right? So when I grew up, I honestly had this belief that I was lazy, that I didn't have good work ethic, etc. Right? Because what I would do is in school, the teacher would say, don't wait till the last night to do the book report. But intuitively, I would just be like, well, the last night I get it done better because there's no fucking around. I know I need to get it done. So I just get it done. Also, I remember in first grade, I was sharing this with Marcus this morning. One of my first memories, right? Homework starts getting passed out. Every kid in there's like, darn, I'm not going to be able to go home and watch TV and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you could literally be doing it right now, like I am, and just get it done. And it would take 3 seconds. And then you don't have to ever do homework. I never once did homework because I always did it in school, you know?
Genius.
And I'm like, so my whole life I've been doing things like that, right? Like, for instance, someone explains something to me and I'm like, I don't get it. And then finally I get it. And I'm like, dude, you could explain this way. And they're like, oh, right. And I always thought like I'm different or like I have bad work ethic because I always wanted to like what I would thought cut corners. But now what I'm starting to realize is like, no, I'm actually here, as every projector is, to be like, I don't have the energy the generators do, right? So I literally cannot keep up with them. Well, I mean, Rachel says all the time, like, you're the least projector person ever. And that's something I'm starting to realize is just how much I've believed that and driven myself to overwork myself to death because I wrongly assumed that my way of doing it, I looked around to everyone else to inform me of how to live life, basically, you know? And now as I'm getting older, I'm starting to realize more and more areas where I'm like, that's not authentically me either. That doesn't feel like me. Yeah, no, the way I'm working, that doesn't feel like me. The way that I'm, you know, like the pressure I put on myself to perform and do this and do that, that's not me. Like these are things I saw in other people. And I went, oh, I made a correlation equal a causation. Oh, if that's how they're successful, I'm going to copy that and do it.
Yeah.
Closing out my own innate wisdom, you know?
It makes me think about, at the same time, the guy, Ben, I recommended Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi because he was asking about, he's like, everything you're saying is very Eastern philosophy. And I just recently started listening to Alan Watts and it's sounding a lot like that. And he goes, and he's like, I was so influenced by Western spirituality, religion to like look outside. And now I'm like going inward and I'm like, that's great. You know, like
follow the breadcrumb trail. You're getting warmer, you know?
Yeah. And he messaged me. He's like, why did you recommend that? Like, almost like I could hear him say, what's the point? Mm-hmm. And so I said, you know, you're going to know why, but here's the sneaky thing with these ego stories that say there's no point to anything. What's the point? Mm-hmm. It'll chase you with everything. Reading a wonderful book, who cares what the point is, ego? I'm going to feel and experience something when I read it that's going to like shatter the lid and blow my mind out, the ego mind, by making the choice to say to that aspect of the ego, I don't need to know what the point is. And going back to what I was saying about him earlier, his struggle has been like more of a nihilistic, what's the point to anything? Why try? That will chase you into, well, what's the point of reading this book? What's the point of doing that yoga class? What's the point of eating healthy food? It's a dense frequency that can create depression. And if you're sleeping long hours, which he shared, and I pointed that to him and he was just like, whoa. Mm-hmm. And I was like, yeah, it's because sleeping long, it's like, whatever, or not really caring, whatever. But even the subtle ways that the ego can really just create this master puppetry. It's like, look at it in all the ways that it wants to be like, I would love to paint or write, but no one's going to read it. And who cares? And all the stories I battle with. So it's like, it's just very interesting how it's always almost like right here. Mm-hmm. Kind of like what you were saying. It's like, it was right there. Like 100%. Almost right in front of me the whole time.
Well, it's funny because like, you know, what is the point, right? There is no objective point. It's a subjective thing every time. Like I don't play guitar so that someone can hear me or anything. It's whatever I make up in the moment. And I think that can be challenging with how we've been raised, where everything is a structure. You go to school at a certain time. There's certain classes you take. You're there for a certain time. There's a point, quote unquote, to everything, right? Well, the point is when you graduate this, you're going to go to that. Well, what's the point of that? Well, then you can do this. Well, what's the point of that? Well, then you can buy a house. What's the point of that? Well, you won't sleep in the woods, right? Like all these kind of things. So we've been trained that everything has to have a point, but the best things in life don't have a point, right? Like we do them because we're feeling a pull to them, right? Not a push, but a pull. Like when I got into doing cannabis coaching, there was a lot of like, oh my God, I don't know. But I just knew it felt right. So I was like, fuck it, I'm going to do it, And I didn't care what people thought because I was like, I don't care. At the end of the day, the only person that I get to live with 100% of the time is me. And so long as I'm keeping myself happy, I don't really fucking care if I make anyone else happy because it's not my job to make them happy. It's my job, hopefully as a coach, to incentivize them to find things to make their own lives happy and hold them accountable so that when their ego comes up and says, what's the point? I go, that's the point that you cared to do this,
Yes.
And that's why it's so important for all of us to have sounding boards and good friends and relationships that will not only celebrate our highs with us, but will also sit with us during our lows and be like, hey, snap out of it, right? Like, and also hold space, not try to bypass our lows or anything, but at that perfect point to ask the right question or whatever, that then like, I remember this as a kid. My dad was really good at this. I'd be crying, I'd be all upset, and he'd wait about 10, 15 minutes, let me cry and tantrum and all this stuff, right? And then he would just throw the right thing in and I'd crack a smile and he'd be like, you can't be upset anymore. You smile. And then I'd be like, shut up, Dad. And then I'd start laughing. And then it was perfect,
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
What a gift.
Yeah.
Because that's like serious medicine. And even like what you were just saying with, when you were saying the thing about like, F it, who cares? Like that, some people don't ever attain that in a lifetime, which like breaks my heart. For me personally, I was going to either just not go down a good path if I kept caring, because you can be in a situation where it's like you have to care what other people think and you have to present as this and blah, blah, blah. And if you're someone who's not meant to fit inside the cookie cutter, if your cookie dough is supposed to kind of go over the edge like mine.
Yeah. Oversized cookies are the best, by
yeah,
the way. Who wants a smaller cookie?
The loaded
I'll
cookies.
take the small one, please, Like said no one ever.
Exactly. I think like with what you do and with what I do, it's almost like the foundation of it is it's like the embodiment of who you are subjectively, who I am subjectively, and it's unique. It's not because it's creating out of our own fabric that isn't like any other fabric, and that within itself empowers other people who might have cookie dough setups that go over the cookie cutout or whatever, and they've had judgment over the cookie's not supposed to look like that. They all on the pan, they're cut out like this, and there's that one messy cookie in the corner that everybody wants in the first place.
Yeah.
And it's allows people to see, wow, this person's really embodying something that all started with the choice to love self, even though maybe that some of the voices might be like, but this, but that, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, you know what? I am not listening to you anymore because I'm choosing me. And it's actually really exciting that I get to do that. And the thing that you were saying about your dad saying something in that moment was literally training your ego. Literally genius. Props to your dad.
Well,
what's his name?
Harry. Yeah.
Harry.
Well, it's so funny too, because Rachel brought this up when I was very young, probably about 6 years old. I remember I was having trouble sleeping one night, and my dad came in and he was like, oh, if you want to be able to fall asleep, what you do is you first focus on your toes and you say, toes relax, right? Then you go to your feet, then you go to your ankles. And so it was so funny because later on in life, when I started telling Rachel this, she's like, God damn it, my dad didn't do that. Your dad trained you to meditate that early, and I never thought of it like that. And that's why I say, like, my dad was not a very, like, he never practiced spirituality. He'd every once in a while say, I believe in God, but it was funny because he lived a very spiritual life, and it was funny, the cookie analogy, what came out to me, right, is that you can either worry about what the cookies look like or you could fucking eat the cookies, right? Like, it doesn't matter what they look like. They taste the same, you know?
And
like,
if they're loaded with chocolate chips.
Yeah.
And like really bomb dough.
Yeah.
And just, yeah.
Like, do you want to be stuck into measuring if every cookie gets 12 chocolate chips, or do you want to just dump those motherfuckers in there and go for a full send and eat that cookie and enjoy it? You know?
You know yours would be edible.
Yeah, I know. Guilty as charged, you know? I mean, it's very on brand,
not,
you know?
I don't know.
It would probably be edible, you know? Guilty as charged. Well, Mary, I mean, this has been amazing. I mean, I'm sure we could go forever.
I know.
But I want to make sure I give people a chance to know where to find you. I mean, of course, make sure you guys listen to the first episode if you haven't. It's amazing. And this one was even better, I think, because we're in person and it's just so much fun.
Totally.
This will be the second of many more.
Yes.
You know, I have specific guests that just return over and over again. You're definitely going to be one of those because I think these conversations are so important. And that's why, like, guys, I'm sure you've all noticed, but like the way I like to do my podcast is rather than have a set list of questions, I like to flow in dialogue because I really feel it's important to understand that like the best things are the mystery. Like, again, I'm not against having questions, but I come into a lot of these episodes not knowing what we're going to get into and not wanting to, because again, the best part is the mystery. So where can people find you? Where can they figure out how they can work with you? You know, you were channeling all throughout this. We were going to do a little bit of channeling, but I could see you channeling the entire time. Guys, I want to say also that I've had the chance to work with Mary. It changed my life. I briefly mentioned it with the 9 and 13-year-old thing. It has catapulted a huge shadow work session that I'm just now starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel of. And I'm like, whoa, this is going to change everything. So again, where can people find you?
Thank you for saying that.
Of course. I mean, 100% deserved.
So if you hop on my Instagram, please find me, add me something with no G .about.Mary. And then if you want to book a session or see any of my group events, it's experiencewithmary.com. I also am open to travel out of state for group events, like big group breath work. I do channeling 101 and I also do group breathworks and I do big groups. So like 40 people plus. And I have a space that's actually one can fit 60 people, one can fit 100 for a series I'm doing coming up. So that's a huge part of my work as well. And they're both very different, but I love both of them. And again, like, thank you so much. It's been so cool how our information systems have just entangled quantumly.
I know.
Because it's like, we're just the humans down here, but it's definitely like these parts are always talking like,
they're high-fiving right now. They're like, about time.
Yeah,
God,
like,
it took them forever.
yes.
You know?
So yeah, thank you so much. And I'm excited for round 3.
Yes, and onward. And I have one last question for you. And I've already asked you the original last question. So I'm going to make this up on the spot. And guys, hopefully this comes out okay. All right. So let's say someone listens to this episode and they're very excited to get into the idea of exploring psychic senses and everything we talked about, right, in this episode of discerning the ego and all of these things. What is the one piece of advice or maybe the one methodology that you would suggest to allow them to begin that aspect of their journey? Like, is there one thing that if someone could walk away from this episode going, okay, I'm going to try this one thing. And I imagine for everyone's different, but what would your immediate insight be to that?
Well, it's very interesting because it seems like my guides told me to tell this. So it's not even me, which is because I haven't even done this myself at all, but inadvertently have in sessions, I guess. But if you just sit in any space, and if you happen to live with someone or it's your parent or your sibling, whomever, have them enter into the room and say hello, but don't look at them. Only hear their voice and feel their texture, feel their energy, and imagine in your mind's eye, and maybe even have them just start to talk to you like, so how's your day going? And kind of start to converse with you. Picturing all of these things of how their voice is sounding, how their mood is seeming, what they look like in your mind's eye, which you already know, but really formulate that vision in your mind's eye as they're talking to you in the doorway or in the hall, and maybe even start to feel into how they're feeling about you making them do this, like really sort of like exercising that part of the mind that's starting to go into that space that can sensate beyond if you were to just say, yeah, come on in the room. And they're like, hey, what's up? And you're just looking at them and you can see what they're wearing and all these things. And even more so what I'm being told is that if you have them walk in, look at them, see everything they're wearing, have them say, hey, what's up? Have them leave, close your eyes, have them come back and do the same thing. Then bring that back to your mind's eye of everything that you just saw. And then as they're talking, keeping that vision in your mind's eye of what they looked like, what they're wearing, what their vibe is, but sensitive to these other aspects of their mood, of what they're doing, of maybe as they're moving through your room, how their pant leg is gyrating against their leg. Just all of these things to exercise those other parts of the mind is something that is now a newfound exercise for my clients because this is like, here we go.
I love that because it's super practical and it's fun, right? Like, and guys, because it's a psychedelic podcast, like try this, right? I mean, the invitation is to try it on maybe a microdose, maybe some cannabis, right? Just get curious. What do different things do? Of course, use discernment, right? Not everyone interacts with psychedelic medicines. They're not for everyone. I throw this into every episode. But if you do discern the right for you, try it out. Like that's some of my favorite things to do with cannabis and these things is, I was telling you this before, Mary, that, when I worked with a psychic for 14 weeks and then I actually experienced clairvoyance and all these things in a sober state, I was like, oh my God, those things are what I experienced with cannabis, right? So if that excites you, try that out as well. So, okay, ladies and gents, like I stated in the intro, Mary is someone who has not only changed my life in absolutely wild ways in the short time we have known each other, but has also changed the lives of countless clients she has and does work with. And for anyone out there looking to gain clarity around the subject of your life as a whole, please take my advice and reach out to her using the info in the show notes for how to contact her. It is very rare that I meet someone who is so unbelievably powerful at allowing us to open up the psychedelic nature of reality and yet so humble simultaneously. Also, if you are enjoying the show, it would mean the world to me if you could leave reviews for the podcast, as it helps the show continue reaching other individuals who can benefit from the information our amazing guests share. And for doing so, I am forever grateful for you. Thank you again for tuning in, and I hope you are all having the best day ever. Much love.